People pleasing is a massive, massive snag for people when it comes to either going to the next level in your business or potentially having better relationships and just, generally getting on in life and career. People pleasing can really hold us back. There are a lot of people talking about people pleasing, which is amazing. But what I want to do today is talk about it more from the lens and from the perspective of psychospirituality and shadow work. And I want to talk a little bit about what's going on at a deeper level here, because what I've found is it's not enough to just work with people pleasing at the level of, okay, let's set better boundaries and let's have better conversations with people and let's put our foot down a bit more. It's actually a lot deeper than that in terms of what the subconscious impulses are that are driving this behavior. All right. So I want to kind of break it down a little bit today. I want to share with you, first of all, what is a people pleaser? Like, let's just all get on the same page around that. I also want to talk about specifically how it shows up in your business. Okay. So I'm going to share 5 examples of how you might be noticing this in your business. And then I want to end on actually looking at the origins of this and going deeper into the shadow and leaving you with some practical examples and tools to sort of work with this and to start meeting and discovering your own inner people pleaser. All right. So, first things first, I guess just to sort of make sure that we're on the same page around what being a people pleaser is. So, if you think about your own life and your own circumstances and your own journey, typically you probably would have found that you have this need and this desire to basically either seek constant approval from other people. Maybe you want to avoid conflict, or maybe you find that you're always putting other people's desires and needs above your own. So, this was something that I would do a lot, which is as long as everyone else is happy and comfortable, whether that was in relationships or in family or whatever, and definitely in business too. It's like just to make sure everyone else is okay, they've got their needs are set, and I'll kind of serve myself last. And what this led to was a lot of depletion, a lot of resentment as well, because I wasn't speaking up and advocating for myself. I would just basically be looking to avoid conflict and make sure everyone else was okay and set up and all good. And it can also show up as just being like excessively accommodating for people. And it's not just about being accommodating because that's the right thing to do, or it's a good thing to do, or it's the noble thing to do. It was actually, or it actually is about being accommodating and agreeable for a very specific reason. And that reason is to gain acceptance and to avoid that conflict, like I said. And usually this comes at the expense of our own well being. All right. And I'm sure just as I'm speaking, you're thinking of many examples, maybe where you've done this. It really does show up in relationships a lot and family life, but it can definitely show up in business too. And so being the people pleaser can feel really stressful. It can feel really overwhelming. Like if we were to just look at this from an emotional level, there are moments where you definitely feel those sort of spikes of overwhelm, okay? And those spikes of kind of this sort of, oh my God, and sort of stress. But the thing that I found just on my own journey with people pleasing is that there is something else that's going on beneath the surface. And it is like this simmering kind of resentment that starts to build. Because ultimately, when you are being excessively accommodating of others and when you're constantly putting yourself last, what that does result in, no matter how benevolent you think you are, is the fact that your boundaries and your needs are constantly being trodden on, not just by others, but you're actually allowing it to happen. Okay. Because this is the thing, right? And we all know this as people on this journey, it always takes two. There is not just someone else doing things to you. Particularly in relationship, with this sort of stuff, with people pleasing, it's not just someone constantly taking, it's the fact that you're allowing them to take, for example. Okay. So people pleasing is very pervasive, and over the last 9 years of my work now, I'm working with hundreds of women in business to support them in going to their next level, whatever that looks like for them. there are some really interesting ways that it shows up in their business as well. And I can definitely attest to some of these also. And I mean, the first most obvious one is this kind of difficulty in setting boundaries. So I'd be really curious to know if you've experienced this too, but whether that is with clients or with team members, or if you work in partnership with others, quite often you really struggle to set boundaries and expectations with people. Or perhaps you might have it written up in your contract, for example, your client agreements, that you will answer emails Monday to Friday between 9 and 5, and you've got a 24-hour turnaround. So you're clear in terms of your service level agreements, but you see yourself and catch yourself kind of replying at 11 o'clock at night or on a Sunday morning when you should be spending time or want to be spending time with your family or taking it easy. And you're doing this because actually you want people to kind of think, oh, wow, you want people to be accepting and approving of you. You want to sort of show up and go above and beyond, but mostly for the purpose of gaining acceptance, okay, or avoiding conflict or whatever, okay. And saying yes to everything, saying yes to, as I said, showing up on a Sunday morning or taking a client call out of hours when actually it's going to really impact your time with family, or showing up potentially if you're sick or unwell. Ultimately, this kind of overextension leads to some burnout. It's this overcommitment energy. It's this, I'm happy to do what I'm doing, but oh my God. And I also feel kind of stressed because of it. And I sort of feel like, actually, this is quite a big ask. And I feel like I'm overextending myself here too. Okay. So, difficulty setting boundaries and always saying yes to everything is one of the ways that shows up in business. The other ways is that through doing this, we often neglect our own self care. All right. So, as I said, whether that is logging on at 11 o'clock at night to answer a bunch of emails, or working on the weekends, or outside of your service level agreements. And again, because you want to do a great job, of course, and I understand that. But ultimately, it's this constant prioritization of the needs of your clients or your team members or partners that can lead to you neglecting your own well-being, impacting, your mental health, your physical health as well. And so this kind of neglect of your self-care is one of the ways that it ultimately shows up and has that knock-on effect, okay? Also, difficulty in charging fair prices. I find this shows up a lot for people in business. If you're a people pleaser, you might really undercharge for your services or for your products. And again, you have this incredible, beautiful heart where you want to give to people and you want to support people and you want to help people and you want to make sure everybody else is okay and that your work is accessible. But you do this quite often to your own detriment. So rather than, for example, going for a business model that offers you range in your offers, where you might have some high ticket, some medium ticket, some low ticket, and some free offers, you tend to focus on the sort of the lower ticket and the free end, um, to make your work more accessible for everybody, rather than recognizing that actually you can have different levels of containers that allow you to feel full and nourished and financially supported. But difficulty in charging maybe mid to high ticket for your work as well can often come up potentially with people pleasers. And obviously this harms your profitability and your sustainability over time and all of that sort of stuff. But I've really noticed something around undercharging with people pleasers too. Also a fear of disapproval. So let me know if this one kind of connects. It's this sort of desire for approval and to make sure that everyone else is happy, to the point where it kind of makes you hesitant to make those tough decisions in your business, those tough, maybe unpopular decisions as well, but decisions that are maybe necessary for your success. So, for example, maybe that is about letting a team member go, right? Maybe that is about sending a message or a letter to your client who keeps forfeiting on their payments, that's a little on the stern side, and that sets a boundary and enforces some of your payment terms. So there's this kind of fear of disapproval and this hesitancy around making some of those tougher calls and taking some of those tougher actions in your business because you're worried that it's going to make you kind of unpopular. and that you're going to get some pushback and there might be some conflict that comes out of it. Okay. And that kind of brings me on to the last point, which is this overemphasis on customer or client satisfaction. And of course, we all want our clients to be very satisfied with our works. We want them to go away and have incredible transformations. We want to make a difference in their lives. Of course, we do. And it's vital to running a successful business. But again, an excessive focus on pleasing every client and every customer and meeting all of their demands, overextending yourself and what feels good to you, it can really lead to sort of it's like a depletion of your resource. Okay? A depletion of your resource, your inner vitality, your energy, your time, money, potentially sometimes as well. Okay. Rather than having difficult conversations. And so a lot of this comes down to this kind of conflict avoidance piece. When we think about a fear of disapproval or a difficulty in setting boundaries, making sure that everyone's happy and satisfied to the point of overextending ourselves or neglecting some of our boundaries, letting some of our boundaries go. A lot of it is around this fear of conflict, not wanting to be seen disapprovingly, not wanting to be seen as the villain, the bad guy, or the greedy one. And this kind of brings me into just wanting to share a little bit about the origins of where the people pleaser can come from. And this is different for everybody, but there are absolutely some themes that I've noticed here. Okay. And again, a lot of this is sort of taken from my own journey as well. But quite often I find that people pleasers have a background where meeting the needs of others, okay, whether that was in their home environment or around parents, etc., meeting the needs of others and gaining their approval was essential for love and for feeling accepted. Okay? Where you potentially were parentified as a child, maybe you had to step into the role of caregiver. Maybe you were looking after your younger siblings. Maybe you were looking after your parents. There was a role switch there for whatever reason. I've spoken a lot about parentified adult children in the past, where quite often, some of the residual kind of essence of that is people pleasing. We've had to step into very early roles where we take on responsibilities that are beyond the scope of what children should have to deal with. Okay. And again, lots of reasons why parents are absent, okay, whether that's through illness or absence or whatever, okay. But typically I found there's an early environment origin here. Perhaps also you were rewarded for being polite, for being the good girl or the good boy, okay, for promoting harmony, getting on with everyone, being almost like the little mini peacekeeper of the family, because you learned that that was also a way to regulate your nervous system. I think particularly if you grew up in an environment that was maybe volatile or chaotic, okay? You learn to find your flow within this by managing others' energy, by keeping everyone else happy and satisfied, okay? To avoid conflict, because perhaps conflict in your home, like it was in mine, was a bit dangerous, was a bit scary, all right? So, you take it upon yourself and you shoulder these burdens. You can shoulder the energetic burdens of others around you at a much too younger age. And that pattern does stay with you because, I spoke a lot about how it shows up in business, but really the reality is it's like how you do one thing is how you do most things. So I would have no doubt that you also have difficulty setting boundaries in romantic relationships, for example. I have no doubt that you fear disapproval in relationships or doing something that maybe your parents or family wouldn't agree with. Right? Maybe there is obviously this fear of being judged as well if you do sort of branch out and do something that feels good for you, that's only for you, such as setting up a business. Maybe there's some fear of judgment that can come up there. Because again, it's stepping out and starting to reclaim our own individuality and identity as separate from our caregivers and our early environment and where we were raised. So typically I find that people pleasers have come from an environment like this where they've really had to work to gain approval. They've had to put others' needs first, maybe through taking on a more parentified role where they were actively rewarded for being polite and harmonious and a good girl or a good boy, and also punished for potentially being, self-serving or quote unquote selfish, right? Or being naughty, right? And so this creates a split. And this is how a lot of our identities are formed. Okay. They're formed from these early experiences where how we received love and acceptance, because all children, in fact, even beyond childhood, we're all wired for social survival. We all have that innate drive within us. And so what happens is that when we display behaviors that may or may not be natural to us, typically they are, because children, they work very naturally in the sense that they just show up and this is who they are, for example. And then they become conditioned through reinforcement, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and all of the other conditioning that kind of goes into it. So their true nature becomes molded and shaped typically over time, unless we have amazing parents that just foster that within us. But most of us have had parents that may be very well meaning, but or caregivers that potentially just didn't necessarily allow us to develop in our naturalness. All right. So this is how the split occurs. This is how our adult identity, our personality, these patterns start to emerge, and they stay with us. And really, it's kind of around about our mid-30s that we still take on and develop these identities. Okay. In fact, our sole job up until the age of about 35 is to develop a really strong identity, a really strong ego, a good and solid understanding of ourself and who we are in the world. And yeah, part of that can come to a point where we think, oh, yeah, actually, I recognize that I'm a bit of a people pleaser. If we're an introspective person, if we're on a journey, we understand that, we've got flaws, quote unquote flaws, and maybe being a people pleaser is one of them for you. But the reality is it's an identity. Okay. It's a mask, it's a suit of armor that you have had to wear based upon conditioning, based on that early environment, based on potentially even beyond the early environment too. There are very, very good reasons, I would hazard a guess, that you have developed your people pleaser armor. Because when you think about those protective qualities of the people pleasers are very adaptable. They're very agreeable. They're very good at diffusing conflict, very good at peacekeeping, making sure everyone's happy. So when you're liked, when you're spoken well of, when you fawn, even potentially in some circumstances, and spoken highly of, and when you're chosen by people, it feels good and it feels affirming. See, look at me, I'm good. People love me, people choose me, people like me. All right. So I get it. I really do. I get it. People like me, people love me. See, I'm valuable. These are all of those sweet, early, young voices that exist within us. Okay, this is where the origin is. This is where we're getting kind of to the root of where the split happened. We want to be loved. We want to be accepted. And we've had to mold ourselves, curb our truth, potentially even put ourselves to one side in order to receive that value and that love and the validation at some point in our lives. And this is a really tender place to meet ourselves. Okay, it's a really tender place because I think, particularly for people pleasers who maybe have been parentified and have shouldered a lot of burdens and responsible for diffusing a lot of conflict at a very early age and taking on those adult tasks, this is a really tender place to meet us, to meet ourselves, hearing those little voices within us. And we talk a lot about inner child work and meeting that vulnerable part of us too. And this is one part and one layer of this work. And it's a very important layer to really listen and to start attuning to what you need in circumstances. And imagine giving yourself, if you can't physically at the moment, but just start giving yourself what you need, attuning to what you need in the moment, your boundaries, what feels good for you, what doesn't feel good for you. And this is a really great first step in terms of understanding the people pleaser, picking up on the patterns, recognizing when you're doing it, and then actually attuning to your inner child, typically in that really young, tender, vulnerable part of you, and checking in with yourself as a parent would to say, what do you need in this situation? How can you speak up for yourself? What boundaries do you need to set? What didn't you like about that? And this can often even just sound like a very literal conversation between these two parts of us. Big part of how I work is I integrate a lot of parts work into my work with clients and in my programs. It's an incredibly powerful way to meet different parts of us, different parts of our psyche, because we go around thinking that we're one unit. We think that we're one personality and we think this is who I am and da 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 da. But the truth is, we have multiple competing parts of us that sometimes want different things, that need different things. And this is why we create so much resistance. This is why we lock into so many different patterns, because certain parts of us will kind of almost like possess us at different times. And so, what we need to do is step in and kind of really broker with using either our adult parent voice or the voice of our true self or our higher self, depending on what resonates with you, to almost start brokering and negotiating and working with these parts and healing these parts, giving these parts what they need also, but also letting them know that they no longer get to run the show. That small, vulnerable child that just wants to be loved and wants to be liked, as sweet as they are, has potentially possessed you to the point where it informs all of your decision making and your people pleasing and conflict avoidance because it wants to be liked. Okay. So, what we need to do is reparent that part of us by having these conversations. And this is what I would recommend you do as a first step, okay? To start listening to the needs of this tender, vulnerable part of you, but also letting it know that it's safe to let go, that it's okay for people not to like us because we like us. Okay. And that's the most important thing. And so parenting, um, parenting, sorry, your inner child is a beautiful place to start with this work as a level one. A level two is to actually start working with the shadow. So the shadow is, if we go back to that kind of that split, whether that was again early experiences where it wasn't okay to have a tantrum, for example. Tantrums are very much like my needs aren't being met kind of thing. It's like how little kids express their rawest, my needs aren't being met, and I'm angry about it. Right. And maybe we were told off. Don't have a tantrum. No one's gonna like you. Be a good girl. That's terrible behavior. Look at you. You look so stupid having a tantrum. Yeah. Um, so we need to kind of, we don't necessarily need to go back to the origin of the split, but we need to know roughly that, okay, if we were told at that moment that having a tantrum, being naughty, being angry because our need wasn't met, if we were told that wasn't okay and we had to basically become a good girl to get someone's love and acceptance and approval, where did that part of us go that had the tantrum? Okay. Where did that part of us go that had the hissy fit, that got angry and thumped our hands on the ground, kicked our legs and cried? Where did she go? She went into our shadow. That naughty part, that angry part, that fiercely self advocating part went into the shadow. Tantrum's just an example. Everyone's going to look different, but typically, this is what happens as a pattern. There is a part of us that was cut off from our conscious identity, personality, and it was repressed and put into the subconscious shadow. So, the level two of this work is to really start reclaiming her. And this is where it can feel uncomfortable because everyone wants to work and re-nurture and reparent their inner child, and that feels like a beautiful piece of work to do, and it is, and it's necessary. Where it starts to get a bit murkier and a bit messier and a bit more raw is when we start to reclaim these unpalatable shadow parts. And this is the work that I do with my clients that is so powerful because it is this deeper layer of integration, a deeper layer of reparenting potentially too, depending on what shadow part we're working with. And so the challenge is to start with level one, start listening, start giving yourself what you need, and helping that part of you just release its grip a little bit on the external environment by giving yourself what you need internally, advocating for yourself. But then to also start exploring what's in the shadow here. What did I actually stuff away? Things like, it depends, and you'll use your own words for this, but as I said, maybe it's the anger. Maybe it's that fierce self-advocacy. Again, it can really help to think of these as parts as well. So the fierce self-advocate stuffed into the shadow. The one who is just self-proclaiming and self-certain, clear of herself. Maybe even the villain. Maybe there's a villain in there. Well, we talk about stepping into our villain era. This is what it really means to be the villain. And this doesn't necessarily mean that we work with these parts and suddenly we become like the world's biggest villain, or we suddenly just become like really inflexible with our boundaries and all of this. It's always this kind of subtle holding of these energies and this play with these energies. Because although these parts exist within us, so let's just stick with the villain, for example, in our shadow, the truth is they want to be integrated in a way that allows them to be seen too. Just as much as the vulnerable inner child part of us, there's also a part of us that needs to be seen that is villain like, that is fiercely self advocating, that is angry. And so, what I'd encourage you to do is just make contact with these parts, whatever they look like for you. And you'll know, and this is where you need to look at your story and to get clear on what you feel you've stuffed away. Sometimes we can't necessarily see it clearly, which is why obviously working with a coach can support you, particularly in shadow work, because we can't see what we can't see because we've disowned these parts of us so hard. Okay, it's like I identify as being agreeable, but I'm very pleasing, but I'm so likable. I'm so easy to get along with. I'm so flexible. Yeah, we pride ourselves. This is the thing. Even though the people pleaser has its negative qualities, it also has an abundance of good stuff that's helped us over the years, helped us be liked, spoken highly of. People respect me, don't you know? So actually making contact with the part of us that's the opposite, that actually risks being disliked. The part of us that is like there to say, listen, this is what I want, and I'm angry that my needs haven't been met. This is the part that's a little bit more difficult to meet and a little bit more difficult to see sometimes in and of itself, because we don't think that we are a villain in terms of our identity, our conscious identity. We see ourselves as I said, thought highly of, chosen by people, likable, good natured. We don't always see the subconscious shadow parts that are the exact opposite. And the thing that I always say about getting acquainted with your shadow is it doesn't necessarily mean that you are secretly some kind of crazy villain, or some kind of crazy, angry, sort of out of control person, right? You're not Jekyll and Hyde. This isn't the shadow how it works either, but there are parts there. And whether they are clear parts that need to be worked with, or maybe even if it's just a fear of being seen as angry, a fear of being seen as a villain, there's still something there to explore in the shadow around the direct polar opposite of the people pleaser, the agreeable, likable peacekeeper. What's the part of you that actually revels in conflict? Like to think that you're a peacekeeper, okay? I have no doubt there is also a part of you, or at least a fear of being seen as someone who is angry, has conflict, fights, the warrior, right? So we have these different parts. And so I think as a first pass, as I said, really make contact with that more vulnerable part of you, the part of you that we can reparent, the part of you that actually wants to get her needs met, that wants to be loved and is there and pleasing everybody else and gaining everyone else's approval because she wants to be liked and chosen. So tending to the vulnerable part first, and then secondly, starting to make contact with that part of you that is in the shadow, whatever that is for you. And as I said, this is the process, and there's a whole process that I guide my clients through around this, because the thing with shadow work is you can't see what you can't see, as I said before. It's very difficult to do shadow work on your own, true shadow work, sincere shadow work, because by its very nature, what's in the shadow is subconscious. It's unknown, completely unknown to us. And this is why it's so hard for people to accept sometimes that they could have an inner villain. They could have someone that absolutely freaking loves to have a fight in the shadow. Okay. And so, but working with these parts, and the point of it is, real shadow integration is about starting to neutralize some of the triggers that might come up when you're a people pleaser. It starts to neutralize the energy of the pattern. The pattern starts to release its grip a little bit more. Because when we can reparent ourselves, the tender part of ourselves, but also then meet the shadow, what happens is that we start to work with the energy and the possibilities of the shadow. What would happen, for example, if you just worked with a fifth or like 5% of the energy of the villain? What would that enable you to do? Obviously, set better boundaries, self advocate, not neglect your self care. Because it's not so much that, it's about being the villain that's out there and hurting other people. But the thing that villains do really well is look out for themselves. Okay. So, what would that look like for you, even if you just dabbled in a tiny percentage of that energy? So, working with the power and the potency of these shadow parts and using this to really fuel what you do, fuel your business, fuel your boundaries in relationships. Again, not to say that you're going to go out and become like a massive villain in your relationship and, suddenly it becomes all about you. No, but it is about enabling you to just self advocate a little bit more, because you're not so afraid of being seen as a villain. You're not so afraid of being this fierce self advocate, warrior, fighter energy. Got it? It becomes a really powerful exercise to do. And again, this is something that I can support you with as well. Definitely reach out if you want more information about how we could work together on this. I do offer private shadow coaching. I also cover it in my Illuminate to Impact Business Mastermind as well as obviously my coach certification and all of this. But it's such a powerful exercise. So, on two levels, meeting the inner child and then working with the shadow parts and integrating them. And there are different levels of shadow integration too. What I don't want to do today, because it would be just way too much, is to go into all the different ways that you can start to integrate your inner villain, for example. But for now, it's just recognizing that there is one is the first step. And then there are different ways that we can integrate that, obviously on the different levels of, the emotional body, the physical body as well. So there are lots of different tools that we can use to do that. But for now, and as a very first step, witnessing this, and Jung spoke about this himself, the very first step of shadow integration is just to witness and to be aware of it, to drag what is in the subconscious into the light of consciousness. And this is how we start to self actualize. This is how we start to go deeper on our journey. This is how we begin to neutralize some of those triggers and painful patterns that we've been carrying with us. So I'm curious to hear your feedback on this session today. I've loved sharing this with you. And as always, feel free to reach out, drop me an email, amanda@lightpurposeliving.com. If you have any ideas on this episode or things that you want to share or ideas for future episodes, I would love to hear from you. And also share this episode out on your social media, tag someone that you think would benefit from it, tag a people pleaser. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.